Hey everybody, I'm your guide, and this is the 13th entry in a series of more than 150 entries where we'll look at the fascinating and often frightening monsters inscribed in our trusty monster manual. In each entry, we'll cover what's in the manual, but also other interesting tidbits I found in my travels. This companion series is meant to educate, entertain, and elevate your excursions into the more dangerous areas of the Forgotten Realms, everywhere from the cemetery behind your local church to the nine hells and everywhere in between, and even some places much, much more interesting. So come, join me, let's begin. Today, we're looking at the Bulette. Yes, that's actually how you say it. It surprised me too the first time I heard it, but for a creature with such a nice sounding name, this thing is actually pretty fearsome. They can go by another name sometimes, the Landshark, which I think fits them perfectly. This magical beast is an accomplished and dangerous predator, and on top of that, its origins are almost completely unknown. In fact, this creature was thought to be extinct until relatively recently when it was rediscovered in the lands of Cormanthor. Cormanthor being a large, dense forest that was, historically, the location of the elven empire of Cormanthir, which also happens to be the location of Myth Draenor, a place I mentioned in my most recent entry on the Second Sundering. But back to the topic of our friend here. The Bulette is feared and hated by most living creatures. These things are approximately 9 feet tall on average and 12 feet in length. I don't have any data on how much they weigh, but just looking at the beast, I imagine it's quite a lot. The Bulette's body is covered in thick, layered plates, with its head shaped like a bullet similar to that of a shark, and a massive mouth filled with multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth. Interestingly enough, some sages believe the Bulette is the result of a mad wizard's experiment at crossbreeding snapping turtles and armadillos with infusions of demon ichor, but I haven't exactly found any hard evidence to prove this theory. Bulettes are, like either of those creatures, heavily armored and have a powerful jaw mechanism for snapping up their unsuspecting prey. These things are covered head to toe in armor. Around the head and rear, this armor is a blue-brown color, while in between the hue might range from gray-blue to blue-green. Areas around the eyes are slightly darkened, with the eyes themselves being a yellow color with blue-green pupils. Like I mentioned before, these things are almost dinosaur-like in the way that they look, and the fact that they're rather low intelligence and motivated by instincts kind of reinforces that feeling. If only we had some data on their origins, I wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that long ago these things were related in some way. But now, let's dive into some of the Bulette's behaviors. Now that you've got a grasp on the physiology of these beasts, and since hunting and eating is basically all they do, let's take a look at the Bulette's methods of acquiring that food. As you might have gathered, the Bulette is essentially built to tunnel through the ground at fairly high speeds. Bulettes use their powerful claws to tunnel through the land when they need to hunt. Heedless of obstruction, the Bulette is quite strong enough to uproot trees, cause landslides, and leave sinkholes behind them. However, while Bulettes can see in perfect darkness with their eyes, they're not the Bulette's primary method of sensory perception. Instead, Bulettes typically hunt through the detection of vibrations in the ground, and move towards the source when their hunger is aroused. So once these vibrations alert the Bulette to the existence of prey nearby, it'll position itself directly underneath the hapless creature, then erupt from the ground to consume the target whole. But a perceptive party won't always be caught flat-footed. The Bulette actually has a relatively small fin towards the back of its head that'll typically protrude through the ground and cut through the land as it shoots towards them. So if you've been traveling through a land that's known to contain Bulettes, keep a keen eye out for these fins and you should be able to avoid them just fine. Anyways, in regards to their diet, the Bulette can be found ranging across temperate lands, feeding on quite literally any animal, including humanoids, that they come across. They seem to show a marked preference for horses and mules and have been recently found marauding horse herds and even attacking armed parties for the single purpose of eating the mounts. As far as humanoids go, though, it's said they actually dislike dwarf and elf flesh, although they often kill them before realizing what they are. But the Bulette absolutely loves halfling meat the most, so it's never happier than when chasing a plump halfling across an open field. So I hope our shorter friends take heed of this and stay clear of this creature. But let's move on and take a look at the potential habitat, or lack thereof, of the Bulette. So this will be a rather short section because the Bulette has no lair to speak of, at least not as far as I've seen. And instead of a lair, the Bulette tend to just roam or hunt a territory up to about 30 miles wide. In fact, its sole criterion for territory is the availability of food, and when it's eaten everything in the area, it just simply moves on to another piece of land. But I will say, if we had to nail down a potential territory, I'd say these creatures would probably hone in on humanoid settlements. Some small village that's rife with prey that they can terrorize until the panicked residents have fled is ideal in the simple minds of the Bulette. Next, let's take a look at their mating behavior and reproduction, because it's actually fairly interesting. I was rather surprised when I looked through the notes regarding Bulette mating. Starting with the males, the male Bulette's mating ritual is pretty complicated, involving the killing of deer and boars, which are then placed in a wide circle. After that, the male will dig a shallow pit in the middle of the circle and line it with the bones of the animals it's killed for the ritual. Over the course of the next week or so, the Bulette will slowly grind the bones in the pit to a fine powder. I'm assuming by using its jaws or simply rolling on top of them. So then within a month or so, usually the female Bulette will be attracted by the odor and make its way towards the circle the male constructed. And once there, the mating can begin. Afterwards, with the female impregnated, it only takes about a day and a half for the female to lay around a dozen eggs, which are completely covered in spines. And by the next morning, they'll have hatched. During the hatching, the female Bulette will begin making a loud noise that actually sounds similar to that of an elephant. Why, you might ask? Well, once hatched, the newborn Bulettes will immediately attack the mother in an attempt to kill her. The mother will fight back, and although she'll usually kill about 3/4 of her young, she almost always will succumb to their attacks eventually. If I were to guess, they do this as a form of instant survival of the fittest and use it to weed out the weaklings. And I don't know about you, but for me, this ritual comes off as something rather noble yet sad on behalf of the mother. But anyways, the babies that survive after the battle with their mother then strike out on their own in search of food. And over the next 2 days, they'll reach full size and adulthood in every way, at least in every way except being able to breed. For that, they need to wait until they're about 25 or so. So, it's a pretty brutal mating ritual overall. Now, I've heard conflicting reports on whether or not the male even survives the whole incident, but given everything else, they probably don't. It always kind of blows me away how intense our world can be sometimes, so I'm pretty thankful that I can finish this entry and walk down to the tavern without having to worry about being swallowed whole by some massive creature swimming through the land. But I think, unfortunately, that's where we have to end this entry. I'd have loved to go into more detail regarding their society, ecology, and especially their origins, but it's pretty surprising to me the lack of lore pertaining to their origins. You'd have thought such a massive beast would be easy to track down through the years, but perhaps the sages just preferred to keep their distance from this thing, which is essentially just the tunneling jaw that's always hungry. And in that regard, I can't exactly blame them. Though, if any of you have any theories regarding where the Bulettes come from, I'd love to hear from you after the lecture. But for now, this is your guide signing out. Be safe, take care, and happy trails.